Imagine a place where time seems to have stopped, where bells echo in the distance and crowds of believers kneel in prayer, while on the other side of the curtains, in silent corridors, decisions that change the course of nations are made by men dressed in long, dark robes. This place is the Vatican, but not the Vatican you see in tourist photos or documentaries. Today, we are going to cross the invisible gates of censorship and discover what really happens behind the most secret walls of faith. Imagine walking through the streets of Rome with the sound of horns honking, the smell of espresso, and tourists with cameras hanging around their necks. Now, suddenly, you arrive in front of St. Peter's Square. Hundreds of people take selfies, wave to the cameras, and wait for the Pope to appear on the main balcony. But what most of them don't know is that, as they look up, there are dozens of closed windows that hide realities that the public has never witnessed. These windows are not just physical barriers, they are symbols of a silence imposed for centuries, a silence that protects, hides, manipulates, and often destroys. To understand the extent of the secret, we need to go back in time. The Vatican as we know it today began to be formed in the 4th century, but it was in 1929 with the Lateran Treaty that it gained the status of a sovereign state. Since then, it has had its own laws, police, currency, postal system, and most importantly, its own way of controlling information. Over the centuries, popes have accumulated not only spiritual power, but also political and military power. Behind every speech of peace, there is a story of war, manipulation, and strategies involving alliances with kings, emperors, and dictators. The epicenter of all these secrets is the Vatican's secret archive, currently renamed the Vatican Apostolic Archive, in an attempt to soften the aura of mystery, but the essence remains the same. This archive holds more than 85 linear kilometers of documents. That's right. If you were to stretch all the shelves in the archive in a straight line, they would cover the distance from Rome to Naples. And access? Extremely restricted. Only accredited researchers, with special authorization and after months of profile analysis, can consult small excerpts of documents. Even then, there are strict restrictions. No cameras, scanners, or notes that deviate from the authorized standard. But what really lies there? Reports from the Inquisition, details of the Crusades, secret correspondence between popes and Nazi leaders during World War II, documents about the apparitions of Fatima, records of exorcisms performed in the name of the Holy See, and according to some theories, even manuscripts that could change everything we know about the history of humanity. Several former Vatican employees have given frightening testimonies anonymously. One of them described the environment as a golden prison, where access to the truth is a privilege for the few, and fear is a constant. Imagine working in a place where every conversation can be monitored, where every step is watched by cameras, and where the simple act of sharing an internal document with the press can cost not only your job, but your life. There are reports of Swiss guards being ordered to watch fellow priests and even bishops considered rebels. Everything is documented, everything is controlled. Have you ever heard of Omertà, the Italian mafia's code of silence? The Vatican has its own code. Breaking this silence can mean exile, the destruction of one's reputation and, in extreme cases, disappearance. For centuries, this code has been used to protect the interests of the Church, but also to hide crimes, abuses, frauds, internal conspiracies, all swept under the sacred carpet of silence. While the public image of the Vatican is that of a temple of faith and prayer, inside its marble halls, there is a real game of political chess. The election of a new pope, for example, is one of the most strategic processes in the world. Behind every vote in the Conclave, there are secret agreements, future promises, and a power struggle worthy of the greatest political thriller series. There are progressive groups that want to modernize the Church, and ultra-conservatives that fight tooth and nail to maintain traditions. Everything happens away from the cameras, but the impacts are felt by billions of faithful around the world. Few people know, but inside the Vatican there are ceremonies that the public has never witnessed. Closed rituals performed in underground chambers where only a restricted circle of cardinals can participate. Reports speak of rites of atonement, exorcism sessions with multiple priests, and even purification rituals considered outside normal liturgical standards. Concrete evidence? Little, but the rumors are strong and persistent. Some scholars point to the existence of audio-visual recordings of these ceremonies kept in armored vaults dozens of meters below St. Peter's Square. If you think the Vatican is an antiquated institution, think again. The Holy See invests millions in security technology, artificial intelligence, and encryption systems to ensure that its secrets remain where they are. A few years ago, it was discovered that the Vatican had hired companies specializing in cybersecurity to monitor possible document leaks. In addition, all internal communications are encrypted with the most advanced protocols. If you think the Vatican is just a place of prayer, meditation, and spiritual reflection, you are completely mistaken. Behind the red velvet curtains, in the cold marble corridors, and in the silent rooms where centuries-old paintings observe in silence, there is a game that few imagine, the game of power. Today, we will go beyond the layer of faith and delve into the shadow politics that moves the destinies of the Catholic Church. Get ready, because what you are about to discover could forever change the way you see the papacy, the conclave, and the most powerful spiritual leadership in the world. Within the walls of the Vatican, there is no single line of thought, a single line of conduct, or a single voice of command. There are factions, groups of influence, lobbies that fight among themselves behind the scenes to define the direction of the Church. On one side, we have the progressives, cardinals who dream of a more modern, inclusive church, open to dialogue with science, human rights, and contemporary society. On the other, the ultra-conservatives, men who believe in the rigid maintenance of traditions, who consider every step towards modernization as a direct threat to the pillars of the Catholic faith. And in the middle of all this, the Pope, a man who, despite holding the highest office in the Church, is often just a piece on a much larger board. The most tense and symbolic moment of this game is the Conclave. Officially, it is the meeting of the cardinals to choose the new pope. In practice, it is a strategic battle that can last days, weeks, and that in some cases borders on the ethical limit. Have you ever wondered how a pope is actually chosen? The process is described as spiritual, but behind the scenes, what happens is a veritable marketplace of promises, blackmail, and secret agreements. The most influential cardinals form alliances before even entering the Sistine Chapel. During the conclave, they exchange favors, negotiate votes, and in some cases, pressure the most undecided with veiled threats. Historical documents reveal that, in some past conclaves, there were attempts at manipulation, bribery, and even espionage. There are reports of wiretapping and monitoring of meetings prior to the conclave. The white smoke may even symbolize divine choice, but what history does not tell is how many human hands shaped that decision. One of the most emblematic cases is that of the election of Benedict XVI. For years, rumors indicated that ultra-conservative groups orchestrated his choice, fearing the advance of more liberal sectors within the Church. Another dark episode was the scandal known as Vatileaks. Leaks of internal documents revealed the behind-the-scenes war that existed within the Vatican, with allegations of corruption, financial mismanagement, and a series of maneuvers to destabilize the papal leadership. During Benedict XVI's pontificate, several of his closest aides were accused of being part of an internal espionage network. The most famous case was that of his personal butler, Paolo Gabriele, who was arrested for leaking confidential documents. These episodes make it clear that the Vatican is more than a spiritual center. It is also a political battlefield. In addition to the ideological struggle, there is another, even quieter dispute: control of Vatican finances. The Vatican Bank, officially called the Institute for the Works of Religion, IOR, has been the target of dozens of investigations for money laundering, financing illegal activities, and embezzlement. Between the 1970s and 1980s, the Banco Ambrosiano case exploded in newspapers around the world. Roberto Calvi, known as God's banker, was found dead under Blackfriars Bridge in London, hanging by a rope. To this day, Calvi's death is considered mysterious, and many believe it was the result of a cover-up. During the investigation, dangerous connections were discovered between the Vatican, the Italian mafia, and even international intelligence agencies. Documents later revealed indicate that high-ranking members of the Church were aware of the illegal operations, but preferred to remain silent in the name of institutional stability. The Vatican is a state, and like all states, it has an active diplomacy. But in the case of the Holy See, this diplomacy goes far beyond official treaties. Through its network of apostolic nuncios, the Vatican maintains direct contact with governments around the world. This network functions as a parallel information system, often more efficient than traditional embassies. During the Cold War, for example, declassified documents indicate that the Vatican collaborated with Western intelligence services to contain the advance of communism in Eastern Europe. The role of Pope John Paul II in the fall of the communist regime in Poland is only the visible face of this alliance. What few people know is that this network of political influence continues to this day, interfering in government decisions, elections, and social policies, all in the name of defending the faith. Within the Vatican, dossiers on practically all the important cardinals in the world circulate. These documents contain information about political preferences, personal scandals, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities. These dossiers are used as bargaining chips at strategic moments. If a cardinal starts to become too much of a nuisance, all it takes is for a single piece of compromising information to be leaked to ruin his career. It is not uncommon to hear stories of bishops and cardinals who, after years of loyal service, are suddenly sent on diplomatic missions to distant countries. Officially, this is a promotion. In practice, it is a disguised exile. Those who dare to challenge this system pay dearly. Journalists who have tried to investigate the finances of the Holy See have been prosecuted, threatened, and in some cases forced to leave Italy. Priests who denounce the Vatican, known as whistleblowers, face severe reprisals. They are removed from their posts, sent to isolated monasteries, or even excommunicated. Death threats are not uncommon. The Vatican may seem like a sacred place, but behind the scenes, the struggle for power turns the environment into a veritable minefield. Perhaps the greatest irony of all is that the Pope himself is often the victim of this structure. Upon assuming the throne of St. Peter, the new pontiff receives not only God's blessing, but also a complete dossier with all the internal conflicts, dangerous alliances, and latent threats within the Church. He becomes both the player and the most vulnerable piece on the board. Popes who have tried to reform the Church have faced fierce opposition. Some have fallen ill mysteriously. Others have resigned under unclear circumstances. The case of Benedict XVI, the first pope to resign in almost 600 years, is still a subject shrouded in conspiracy theories. Power within the Vatican is a game that no one plays with impunity. Imagine walking through the streets of the Vatican, surrounded by tourists looking up, admiring the statues, domes, and monumental architecture. Now imagine that right beneath your feet lies a labyrinth of tunnels, crypts, secret passages and chambers that hold secrets buried for centuries. Secrets that, if they were to come to light, could rewrite the history of the Church, and perhaps of humanity. Today, we will descend these forbidden staircases together. We will plunge into the darkness where the public is not allowed, where the silence is thicker than the stones, and where the echoes of conspiracies, secret rituals, and unsolved mysteries still resonate. The starting point of this underground journey is the Vatican necropolis. Located directly beneath St. Peter's Basilica, this necropolis is a true elite cemetery in Christian history. Officially, it is the resting place of the mortal remains of St. Peter, the first pope of the Catholic Church. But the necropolis is much more than an archaeological site. It is the first level of a much larger structure. Only an extremely limited number of people have access to this area. Researchers, high-ranking priests, and, occasionally, some heads of state on private visits. Reports from those who have been there describe narrow corridors, with walls covered in Latin inscriptions and ancient symbols which go far beyond Christian iconography. Symbols that, according to some scholars, refer to secret orders, mystery cults, and surprisingly, even traditions that predate Christianity. Few people know, but the Vatican is interconnected by a network of underground tunnels that have served throughout history as escape routes for popes in times of danger. One of the most famous of these passages is the Passetto di Borgo, a corridor that connects the Vatican to Castel Sant'Angelo. Built in the 13th century, this tunnel was used during invasions and wars to protect the Pope and the Church's treasures. But there are other tunnels, much less known, whose locations are kept absolutely secret. There are reports of passages leading directly to unknown crypts, clandestine meeting rooms, and even chambers that are theorized to have been used for secret rituals. Some scholars suggest that these passages also served as a route for transporting documents and valuable objects in times of crisis, protecting them from invasion and looting. And what about the secret chambers? Many of the underground tunnels end in armored rooms, with reinforced doors, guarded by modern security systems and protected by direct papal orders. Some of these chambers, according to reports from former Vatican employees, house historical artifacts of inestimable value. Some claim that apocryphal manuscripts, which describe an alternative version of the life of Jesus Christ, are kept in these rooms. Others speak of documents that could expose scandals of global proportions, secret agreements with totalitarian governments, records of abuse, and even information about unexplained phenomena classified as supernatural. More daring conspiracy theories claim that the Vatican hides relics from other religions, objects of power, and even fragments of texts in these underground vaults that could call into question the central dogmas of Christianity. Another aspect that is rarely covered by the mainstream media is the existence of chambers reserved for exorcism rituals. The Vatican is one of the few institutions in the world with an official department dedicated to studying and performing exorcisms. There are underground rooms with total soundproofing, where specialized priests perform intense rituals to expel what they believe to be evil entities. Unofficial reports speak of sessions that lasted for days, with cases of possession so serious that the recordings remain locked in safes. The Vatican also has audio and video archives of these sessions, but to date, none of these recordings have been released to the public. In addition to the physical objects, there are rumors about the existence of prophetic documents hidden in the underground chambers. One of the best-known cases is that of the prophecies of Fatima. The Vatican has officially released the contents of the 3 messages delivered by Our Lady to the 3 shepherd children in 1917. But scholars and former officials say there is much more. Entire sections of the 3rd secret of Fatima have never been revealed. These chambers are also said to contain records of other apparitions, apocalyptic visions of saints, and documents about cosmic events yet to come. Another mystery buried beneath the marble floors of the Vatican are the so-called apocryphal Gospels, texts that tell stories about the life of Jesus Christ that are very different from the official narrative of the Bible. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, that of Thomas, that of Judas, all are texts that suggest theological interpretations that are completely different from those accepted by the Church. What do these texts say? Among other things, that Mary Magdalene played a much more central role in the life of Christ than is officially recognized. That Judas, instead of being a traitor, fulfilled an essential mission in the divine plan. And that the true teachings of Jesus were shaped, rewritten, and censored over the centuries. These documents are kept under lock and key. Some are in papyrus format, others on parchment protected by climate control systems to preserve their integrity. In addition to texts and documents, there are rumors about objects stored in the underground chambers that have never been officially identified or classified. Fragments of meteorites considered sacred, metal devices of unknown origin, and even artifacts that, according to some sources, challenge the known technology of the time in which they were created. These objects are studied by internal committees composed of scientists, theologians, and experts in ancient history. Access to these materials is restricted to very few people, with entry and exit records strictly controlled. Some authorized visitors to the underground areas have reported an unusual sensation upon entering these chambers, a kind of heaviness in the air, as if the environment itself held a type of repressed energy. There are reports of nausea, chills, and even loss of consciousness in some deeper areas. Experts explain that this could be the result of claustrophobia or psychological suggestion. But among the corridors of the Vatican, others believe that these sensations are the result of the presence of unknown forces. If one day the Vatican's censorship were to be lifted, these crypts and underground chambers could become the stage for the greatest historical and religious revelation of humanity. Images of these tunnels, documents hidden for centuries, and physical evidence of everything that was hidden could come to light, shaking the foundations of faith as we know it. Would humanity be prepared to face these truths, or would chaos ensue in the face of such profound secrets? Now that we have descended into the darkest recesses of the Church's history, prepare yourself for an even more disturbing dive. In the next section, we will talk about the most serious scandals, the hidden abuses, and the internal conspiracies that threaten to destroy the Vatican's image. The darkest side is yet to come. When we think of the Catholic Church, the first image that comes to mind is of a place of faith, hope, and compassion. A place where millions of people seek spiritual solace, moral guidance, and a connection with the divine. But behind this sacred facade, there is a dark side. A side that for decades, perhaps centuries, has been kept hidden behind walls of silence and censorship. Today we will explore this dark side. We will open the Pandora's box of Vatican morality and reveal scandals, abuses, and conspiracies that have been deliberately swept under the rug of history. The subject is delicate, but it cannot be ignored. Sexual abuse within the Catholic Church is one of the greatest scandals in modern history. For decades, cases of abuse committed by priests, bishops, and even cardinals were systematically hushed up. Internal documents show that the Vatican was fully aware of the extent of these crimes, but chose to protect the abusers rather than the victims. The pattern was repeated. When a complaint was filed, the accused was simply transferred to another parish, often in another country, far from the eyes of the law and the press. In 2002, the Boston Globe burst the bubble with a series of investigative reports that exposed a network of abuse cover-ups in the Archdiocese of Boston. The case inspired the Oscar-winning film Spotlight, but what few people know is that the Boston scandal was just the tip of the iceberg. Subsequent investigations revealed similar cases in countries such as Ireland, Germany, Australia, Chile, Argentina, and even Brazil. Internally, the Vatican treated these cases with the term delicta graviora, more serious crimes. But in practice, punishments were light. Investigations were internal, and often silence was bought with out-of-court settlements. Leaked documents revealed how the cover-up system worked. First, victims were discouraged from reporting. When they insisted, they were pressured into accepting confidential agreements. Accused priests were sent to spiritual retreats or transferred to remote locations. In some cases, victims received compensation, but on the condition that they signed confidentiality clauses. Most shockingly, the Vatican itself maintained a database with the names of accused priests, but refused to share this information with police authorities in several countries. For years, Pope John Paul II was criticized for his omission in relation to abuse cases. It was only during the pontificate of Benedict XVI that the first, more effective measures began to emerge, but many critics point out that it was too little, too late. The problem of abuse within the Church was not only moral, it was political. There was a fear that a large-scale scandal would destroy the credibility of the institution, and credibility means power, influence, and money. Internal lobbies acted forcefully to prevent investigations. Influential cardinals even interceded personally to protect accused priests, and the cases are not limited to sexual abuse. There are reports of financial exploitation, influence peddling, and even involvement with organized crime networks to cover up scandals. A notable case is that of Cardinal Bernard Law of Boston. After being accused of covering up dozens of cases of abuse, he was promoted to a position in the Vatican and remained protected until his death. Among the most disturbing cases is that of the Legionaries of Christ congregation and its founder, Martial Maciel. For decades, Maciel was accused of sexually abusing seminarians and having illegitimate relationships, including secret children. The Vatican knew about the abuse, but for years ignored the allegations. It was only after the death of John Paul II that Benedict XVI took action against the congregation. Maciel's case is symbolic because it shows how, even in the face of concrete evidence, the internal power of certain groups within the Church was capable of suffocating the truth. One of the questions that most intrigues journalists and historians is, what else is the Vatican hiding? In the Vatican Apostolic Archives, formerly the Secret Archives, there are thousands of pages dedicated to internal investigations into abuse and scandals. These documents contain accounts of victims, testimonies of priests, and guidelines from cardinals on how to deal with cases. Many of these documents remain inaccessible to the public, and there are those who say that the real extent of the crimes is much greater than one might imagine. Some researchers estimate that the real number of victims of clerical abuse may exceed 1 million people worldwide. And what happens to those who know too much? Over the years, several mysterious deaths have occurred involving people linked to investigations into abuse within the Church. Journalists, priests, and even lawyers who worked on cases against the Vatican have died under suspicious circumstances. One of the most talked about cases is that of Emanuela Orlandi, a teenager who disappeared in Rome in 1983. The daughter of a Vatican employee, her disappearance has never been solved. Theories point to the involvement of the Italian mafia, Vatican authorities, and even secret services. Another emblematic case was that of Father Giuseppe Tedeschi, found dead in his apartment in Rome. He was about to release compromising documents about abuse in the Vatican. For many believers, discovering this hidden face of the Church was an irreparable shock. Thousands of people have abandoned their faith, lost confidence in the institution, and started to question everything that once seemed sacred. On the other hand, there are those who argue that the blame does not lie with faith, but with those who manipulate it, that the essence of Christianity remains pure even in the face of human corruption. But the truth is that the damage to the image of the Church is profound and perhaps irreversible. Governments in several countries have launched their own investigations. The Australian government created the Royal Commission to investigate institutional abuse. In Germany, the Catholic Church was forced to acknowledge more than 3,000 cases. In Chile, scandals led to the collective resignation of all the country's bishops. Pope Francis, for his part, has tried to implement transparency and punishment measures, but has faced internal resistance from conservative sectors that prefer to maintain the status quo. In light of all this, one question lingers. How long will the Vatican be able to maintain control over this narrative? With the advancement of technology, document leaks, and public pressure, many believe that we are about to experience a new wave of revelations. If the archived documents are ever fully released, the impact could be devastating, not only for the Church, but for the faith of billions of people around the world. Now that you know about the scandals and abuses that the Vatican tried to hide at all costs, get ready to discover something even more disturbing: the system of information manipulation used to control history, the media, and even what you know about your own faith. Imagine living in a world where history is not what really happened, but rather what you were allowed to know, where facts are carefully selected, edited, and in some cases erased from the collective memory. A world where the line between truth and lies is controlled by a single institution. This world exists, and its epicenter is within the walls of the Vatican. In this section, we will delve deep into the strategies and tools that the Vatican uses to control information. A system of manipulation that goes far beyond simple censorship. We are talking about an apparatus of historical engineering that has shaped the way billions of people see the past, the present, and even the future. To understand how the Vatican became a master in the art of information manipulation, we need to go back to the first centuries of Christianity. When the Roman Empire adopted Christianity as its official religion in the 4th century, the Catholic Church began to accumulate not only spiritual power, but also political and cultural power. From that moment on, it assumed control over the main historical records of Western civilization. During the Middle Ages, while most of the population was illiterate, the clergy were the exclusive holders of written knowledge. Books, parchments, and documents were kept in monasteries. It was the Church that decided what would be copied, what would be destroyed, and what should remain hidden. This monopoly on the writing and reproduction of texts allowed the Vatican to create an official narrative of history, a narrative that remains, in many ways, to this day. One of the most emblematic examples of the control of information is the selection of texts that make up the Bible. Between the 2nd and 4th centuries, dozens of texts competed for space as legitimate sources on the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. There was the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Judas. Texts that presented radically different views from those we know today. These texts, known as apocryphal Gospels, were deliberately excluded by the councils that defined the biblical canon. Why? Because they presented ideas that could threaten the authority of the nascent church. Many of these texts presented Jesus as a more human teacher, closer to the people, and in some cases, with teachings that questioned the need for an ecclesiastical hierarchy. The result of this exclusion was that for centuries, the faithful knew only a very specific version of the story of Christ. With the advancement of the press and technology, the Vatican had to adapt. This is how the first official censorship mechanisms were created. For centuries, the Church maintained the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, a list of prohibited books. Any work considered dangerous to the Catholic faith was included on this list, and its reading was strictly prohibited. Among the censored books were scientific, philosophical, and even literary works. Galileo Galilei, for example, was condemned by the Inquisition for defending the idea that the earth revolved around the sun, an idea that contradicted the literal interpretation of the Bible. The index was only officially abolished in 1966, but the habit of controlling information remains alive. Today, the Vatican has a highly specialized department in communications. The Dicastery for Communication is responsible for managing everything related to the public image of the Church. This body controls Vatican Radio, L'Osservatore Romano, the official newspaper of the Holy See, Vatican TV, and papal social media. Every word spoken by the Pope is carefully drafted and reviewed. No speech is made without passing through several layers of approval. In cases of crisis, such as financial scandals or abuse cases, the dicastery acts quickly and efficiently to minimize damage. Emergency communications are prepared, standard responses are distributed to spokespeople, and if necessary, a strategy of official silence is adopted. The Vatican maintains a team of analysts who monitor daily what the international media publishes about the Church. Journalists who ask uncomfortable questions may have their access to the Holy See revoked. There are records of reporters being banned from press conferences for insisting on topics considered sensitive. In addition, there are documented cases of attempts to pressure media outlets to have certain news stories taken off the air or edited. In 2012, during the Vatileaks scandal, Italian journalists reported receiving veiled threats not to publish certain documents. At various times in history, the Vatican has not only hidden information, but also rewritten historical facts. A classic example is the figure of Mary Magdalene. For centuries, she was portrayed as a prostitute, an image that only began to be officially revised by the Church at the end of the 20th century. Later studies have shown that this image was deliberately constructed to minimize the leadership role that Mary Magdalene would have had in the early years of Christianity. Another example is the case of the Inquisition. For years, the official numbers of victims were systematically underestimated by the Church. Only recently have some documents begun to be analyzed more rigorously by independent historians. When we talk about the manipulation of information, we cannot forget the case of the apparitions of Fatima. The 3 children who claimed to have received messages from the Virgin Mary in 1917 were subject to intense control by the Vatican. The third secret of Fatima was kept absolutely secret for decades. When it was finally released in 2000, many experts pointed out inconsistencies in its content. There are theories that the Vatican never fully revealed the content of the messages, and that the most impactful parts, those that speak of internal crises in the Church and scandals involving the clergy, remain locked away in secret vaults. Researchers who try to access the Vatican's historical archives face a veritable bureaucratic marathon. Even scholars with decades of experience have their requests for access denied. Only a small fraction of the collection is open to the public, and with several restrictions. Documents related to the Holocaust, for example, only began to be released recently, after decades of international pressure. And even then, access is controlled. There are entire sectors of the Apostolic Archives that remain completely off-limits to any outside historian. With the advancement of digital technology, the Vatican has also expanded its field of action. In recent years, the Dicastery for Communication has begun to invest heavily in SEO strategies, image campaigns on social networks, and even operations to monitor online content. There are reports of YouTube channels that have been targeted by mass complaints for publishing content critical of the Church. Blogs and websites have been taken offline after being sued for defamation. The information war, which used to be fought in libraries and newspapers, is now taking place in the digital environment. Controlling information is not just a matter of institutional reputation, it is also a strategy to shape the minds of the faithful. Through masses, catechesis, publications, and even audio-visual productions, the Church works to reinforce its official narrative. Controversial issues such as pedophilia, the participation of women in the clergy, the marriage of priests, and even the Church's relationship with money are carefully addressed so as not to generate internal crises. It is a work of psychological engineering that aims to protect the power structure, keeping the faithful within a cycle of belief and obedience. The big question remains, for how long? With the evolution of the internet, leaks, and the independent press, absolute control of information is becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Secret documents are being digitized. Insiders are breaking the silence. Research groups around the world are working tirelessly to uncover secrets kept under lock and key. The Vatican knows it is racing against time. And perhaps one day the truth will come to light in such an overwhelming way that not even the entire censorship apparatus will be able to contain it. And now that you understand how the Vatican manipulates history and controls information, prepare yourself for the most shocking conclusion of all. In the next section, we will reflect deeply on what all this means and what could happen if the walls of secrecy finally fall. We have reached the end of this dark journey through the corridors of power, conspiracies, buried secrets and manipulated truths. There have been thousands of years of carefully crafted silence, centuries of hidden documents, destroyed lives, distorted information and stories that never reached public knowledge. But now, with everything you have heard so far, an inevitable question echoes in your mind. Why so much effort to hide the truth? Why would an institution that preaches light and salvation need to delve so deeply into shadow and secrecy? The answer is as simple as it is disturbing. Power. The power to control faith. The power to decide what people believe. The power to manipulate the history of humanity. Truth, within the context of the Vatican, has never been just a theological issue. It is a currency of incalculable value. Each hidden piece of information, each buried document, each silenced testimony represents a piece in a much larger game. For centuries, the Vatican has understood that knowledge can be a weapon that can topple empires, destroy reputations, and above all, shake the faith of millions of people. Imagine for a moment if all the documents about the sex scandals, the political cover-ups, the alliances with totalitarian regimes, and the forbidden gospels were released at once. The impact would be devastating. Churches could be empty. Believers would lose their faith. The credibility built over 2,000 years could crumble in a matter of days. And that is precisely why secrecy has been elevated to the status of dogma within the walls of the Vatican. It is not just a state policy. It is a method of survival. But there is a fundamental lesson here, something we all need to understand. Silence can protect institutions, but it destroys people. History shows us that every attempt to hide the truth sooner or later collapses. The truth can be painful. It can be uncomfortable. It can shake everything we believe in. But it is necessary, because only through the truth can we build a more just, more transparent, and above all, more human future. And you? Are you prepared to question? Are you ready to look beyond appearances, distrust official versions, and seek answers on your own? What we have seen so far is not an accusation against faith. It is not an attack against people of goodwill who believe in a better world. The target here is the system, a system that for centuries has chosen silence over justice, censorship over transparency, power over compassion. If there is a true lesson we can learn from this story, it is that faith must walk alongside truth, that spirituality is only legitimate when it does not hide behind lies. So, before blindly trusting any institution, be it religious, political, or social, question, research, seek alternative sources, listen to both sides of the story. Because the worst blindness is the one we choose to have. What if one day the walls of the Vatican fall? What if suddenly all the archives are opened, all the documents are released? Can all the silenced voices finally be heard? Is the world ready to face this avalanche of truths? Maybe not. Maybe chaos will set in. Maybe the faith of many will crumble. But at the same time, Maybe this is the first step towards a new era, an era of transparency, of responsibility, of reconciliation with the past. Because, in the end, no matter how painful the truth may be, it will always be the only path to true liberation. Thank you for following us so far in this deep, tense, and necessary investigation. If you liked this content, we have a very important request. Thank you for watching this video. We ask that you subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, activate the notification bell to be notified of our posts. Until the next video.